Hey everyone, John Warren here from First Frame Photography. Here's something a lot of Bayer shooters don't realize. DeepPRIME XD3 didn't start as a Bayer feature that eventually got extended to Fujifilm. It's the exact opposite. XD3 was built as a dedicated X-Trans engine first, addressing a problem that's unique to the Fujifilm sensor design, and only later expanded into the Bayer world with PureRAW 6 and PhotoLab 9.6. That history isn't just trivia, it actually changes how you should use this tool if you're shooting Fujifilm. This is the companion video to my written DeepPRIME XD3, the complete guide for X-Trans sensors, and in it, I'm covering the complete picture. Why the X-Trans color filter array makes XD behave differently than it does on Canon and Sony bodies. Why your ISO crossover point is earlier than a Bayer's shooter. When I mean crossover point is, when do you determine which engine to use? In Fujifilm, you're going to choose that at a lower ISO than you would with a Bayer sensor array. I'm going to show you how to judge when you've pushed the noise reduction too far for that classic Fujifilm look, and exactly how to fix the artifacts that you might run into. If you shoot Fuji, this is the guide I wish someone had handed me when XD3 first came out. Let's get into it. There's a number of sections to this video, and I'm going to start off with why X-Trans came first. Fujifilm's X-Trans sensor uses a more complex 6x6 color filter pattern instead of the standard 2x2 Bayer array. That complexity made demosaicing historically harder. Older processors would sometimes produce worm-like artifacts in foliage, smear fine fabric structure, or introduce false color in repeating patterns. I remember back in the day when this was first brought to my attention in class, and students would say, how do I get rid of this? How can I do this? Well, I had the answer for it back then, and I have the answer for you right now. And the answer is DxO's DeepPRIME 3 and DxO's DeepPRIME XD3. DxO positioned DeepPRIME XD3 as the high detail branch specifically built to recover that difficult texture while suppressing noise more effectively than earlier DeepPRIME generations on Fujifilm files. It first appeared as an X-Trans specific technology. It gained broader Fujifilm support in PureRAW 5.3, and by the time we got to PureRAW 6 and PhotoLab 9.6, it had become part of DxO's mainstream top-tier pipeline for both sensor types. That release order explains why XD3 is especially relevant to the Fujifilm files that contain dense texture, repeating patterns, and high ISO color noise. This is exactly the terrain where X-Trans demosaicing had traditionally struggled. As with some of my previous DxO videos, I do have a companion PDF that follows along with this video. The link to that PDF is in the description below. I also have one more thing I'd like to mention, and that is, before we go any further, I'd like to mention that I am a DxO affiliate. Now, what that means to you is that if you use my affiliate link, which is in the description below, you'll get a 15% discount if you decide to purchase any of the DxO software. And I may at some point earn a commission of sorts, but it's at no cost to you. One other thing, this applies to new purchases only. If you're thinking of upgrading your current software, the usual discounts apply. For full details on the current prices, please visit DxO's website at www.dxo.com. And lastly, before we get any further into this video, I would like to mention that I have this little app for you, which is linked inside the PDF, which is linked in the description below. I know it's a little confusing, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to download the PDF to actually access this neat little app. It's called the DeepPRIME XD3 Noise Lab X-Trans Sensor Denoise and Detail Simulator. It's got a long name, but boy, is it ever cool. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's move on to the next section. This section I'm going to title DeepPRIME 3 versus XD3, the X-Trans specific decision. The DeepPRIME 3 versus XD decision works differently on Fujifilm sensors than it does on Bayer cameras. And this is the single single most important thing to understand from this video. On Bayer cameras, XD3 earns its keep primarily at high ISO settings. On X-Trans cameras, the crossover point arrives much earlier because of the 6x6 filter array, which adds demosaicing complexity even at moderate ISO settings. That means XD3 isn't only a high ISO tool for Fujifilm shooters, it's also the engine to reach for on any image where fine detail, fine foliage, repeating textures, intricate subject structure is at the heart of the photograph, even at base ISO. DeepPRIME 3 is still your everyday cleanup tool, fast, predictable, and excellent for portraits, moderate ISO, and large batches. And the reason for that is that DeepPRIME 3 doesn't use as many resources as XD3 does, so things can be done quicker. On Fujifilm files specifically, don't wait for high ISO before considering XD3. Ask yourself, does this subject contain dense foliage, fabric weave, brick, or repeating architectural details? If yes, XD3 may be worth it even in good light. In this section, ISO thresholds and the Fujifilm character, here are the practical thresholds for X-Trans files specifically. ISO 160 to 800, choose DeepPRIME 3, which is faster. XD3 is preferred when fine texture or shadow recovery matters. Dense foliage at base ISO favors XD3 even at this point. ISO 800 to 3200, in the past, most of us would have cringed at possibly shooting at these high ISOs. We don't have to worry about that anymore. The texture retention advantage usually becomes easier to see in this ISO setting range. Street, travel, and available light work benefit clearly. The next grouping of ISOs is 3200 to 6400. I use that a lot in my hockey. XD3 is strongly preferred with a clearly visible difference over DeepPRIME 3 at 100% view, and even more obvious at 200% view. Although we probably wouldn't use 200% view in real life, it's just nice to know that we can recover this or fix some of the issues that may arise. The next grouping is 6400 to a whopping 12,800, where XD3 remains the best quality path, but inspect the edges and smooth shadows carefully before batching. ISO 12,800 and beyond, test XD3 first, but keep DeepPRIME 3 as a fallback if artifacts appear in smooth gradients. The luminance slider still defaults to 40, but on Fujifilm files, values in the 10 to 25 range specifically retain that film-like micro texture many X-Trans shooters value. It's probably one of the reasons why we moved over to the Fuji line anyways. This is especially suited for street and documentary work. Above a threshold of 65, you risk not only waxy skin, but a loss of that characteristic Fujifilm depth entirely. One scene content note is a low ISO forest landscape with intricate foliage can justify the XD3 sooner than a cleanly lit portrait at a higher ISO. It's not just about noise, it's about what the subject demands from demosaicing. This next section is titled The Convincing Fujifilm File Standard and Fixing Common Artifacts. This is the concept that separates the X-Trans guide from the Bayer guide. For Fujifilm shooters, the test isn't just, does it look like a believable photograph? Does it still feel like a Fujifilm image? DeepPRIME 3 acts as the natural baseline for X-Trans. It keeps fine detail, micro contrast, and subtle textures in foliage, street scenes, and skin while avoiding the mushy rendering older X-Trans demosaicing was known for. DeepPRIME XD3 goes further, but if applied to an already clean image, it may start to look overpolished, losing that organic character. Ask yourself 3 questions on every processed file. Has the film-like microtexture survived, or has it turned into waxy flatness? Do edges look naturally sharp or brittle and synthetic? Does the image retain the tonal depth that drew you to Fujifilm in the first place? It's kind of key. The most common issues you'll run into are foliage that looks over-resolved or brittle, worm-like artifacts in fine texture, and the same hazy boundary artifact that appears on Bayer files at high contrast edges, though it's typically less severe on well-exposed, moderate, ISO X-Trans shots. Here's the fix order. First, if shadows look plasticky or overly smooth, lower the luminance from 40 down to about 30, maybe 35. Often the fastest fix on ISO 1600 to 3200 street files. Second, reduce force details towards -20, then -40 if needed to soften over reconstructed texture on a hazy boundary edge. Third, and this is worth repeating for X-Trans specifically, comparing directly against DeepPRIME 3 is not a failure. On a clean exposure ISO 1600 file, DeepPRIME often looks just as good and maybe better preserve that Fujifilm rendering character. Okay, so here's that cool app I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the DeepPRIME XD3 X-Trans Noise Lab. It's an X-Trans sensor denoise and detail simulator. It's for educational purposes only. So now if we come over here where we see capture and settings, simulates the DeepPRIME XD3 denoising and demosaicing panel. Sensor type, X-Trans. Fujifilm APS-C 6x6 irregular color filter array. DeepPRIME XD3 X-Trans supports through 5th generation sensors. So it's good up until everything that's on the market today. I'm going to just leave this right here at the 1600 ISO sensitivity, and I'm choosing a 26 megapixel sensor. That's what my X-T4 uses, but previous generations have smaller sensor sizes, if you will, and the generation 5 has that 40 megapixel sensor. I think 40 megapixels on a crop sensor, probably about the max you want to go with today's available technology. So you can read all about the different sizes down over here, and now we have a luminance slider defaulting at 40, and we have the force detail slider which defaults at 0. The luminance slider, as you are probably familiar with, goes from 0 to 100, and the force detail starts at 0, but it can go as far down as -50, making your image look a little softer, and it can go as high as +50, which makes your image look a little harder, crunchier, if you will. As we move these sliders around, you can see that the graph here changes, and if you roll your cursor over the graph lines, you'll be able to figure out what's going on with the grain reduction percentage, the detail retention percentage, and the artifact risk percentage, force details. Most of the stuff here that we're going to be showing in this app is the force detail thing, but also we're going to play with the luminance slider. Basically what happens when you increase the luminance noise reduction, you're going to get a softer looking image. If you reduce the luminance slider, you're going to get no noise reduction. If you increase, you're going to get a softer, smudgier, smoother looking image. Neither are what you're wanting. So now we can see our grain reduction is 37% at this starting value. All depending on the ISO that you've got with your shot, you may want to reduce that down so it doesn't blur some areas that you think you want to have available. And then you have the force details, of course, which will increase all that kind of stuff. So at this value right here, we have a 37% grain reduction and a 75% detail retention. The artifact stage is set to clean at this point, and the safe force detail ceiling is 32. Then we got the stair-step artifact threshold. Play around. As you move these sliders around, you'll see stuff moving around in here, just as you see stuff moving around there. Down here we have the synthetic X-Trans sensor patch. That's probably one of the best things for you to see visually what's actually going on. And we have the clean mid-false texture, edge halos and crunch, X-Trans worming, eek, and then severe watercolor and smearing. So as we move these sliders around, we're going to see something visually change in here. So at the default, this is what our image looks like. Okay, clean. And if I move this up, you can see how I'm forcing some of the details to reveal themselves. And if I come all the way up to, say, 32, well, that's my limit with this. And if I just come into 33, now you can see there's a drastic difference. and we have some mild false texture showing up. And if I go past 36 into 37, we're starting to get some edge halos. See that? Halos. Right around here is a visual. All right. And then we can go a little bit further where we've got the X-Trans worming. And then if we go even further, yikes, it's just starting to look really, really bad. What I want you to do is I want you to play around with this, and I also want you to take notes. But as a quick reference, depending on what you have selected, if I come over here and go 32, notice how this goes that way and this comes down to here. And if I go here, so there you go. And you can change this to that, and you can see stuff over here changes as well. This is really cool. I think this is really great. One thing about this tool, it's an interactive teaching model for DeepPRIME XD3 X-Trans decision making on Fujifilm sensors. It uses synthetic X-Trans server sample data and heuristic thresholds, not real life thresholds. It's not DxO's proprietary algorithm and does not reproduce exact DeepPRIME XD3 X-Trans output. Luminance and force details use normalized teaching scales. Anyways, you can read all about that. It's not anything to do with DxO whatsoever. It's just something that I came across in my research for this video. So I want to just mention that the link to this app is in the PDF that accompanies this video. The link to the PDF is in the description, and then once you download the PDF, inside that PDF, there will be a link to this app. I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. If you would like me to create a separate video doing a little bit more of a deep dive into this app for the X-Trans Noise Lab or the Bayer Noise Lab, please just ask me, leave a comment in the comment section. All right, next, we're going to go over to the Lightroom workflow. Just a quick reminder. If you're a Lightroom user, then this next section is going to be important for you. One critical step for Fujifilm shooters. After PureRAW 6 returns a processed DNG to your Lightroom catalog, you really got to make sure that you go back into the develop module and you disable the next three things: lens corrections, noise reduction, and remove chromatic aberration. They need to be zeroed out. XD3 is already applied best in class noise reduction, demosaicing, and optical profiling on your RAF file. Leaving Lightroom's corrections active doubles the correction and can introduce visible artifacts specific to the X-Trans sensor. What you would want to do at this point in time is come over to the develop module, and in the develop module, in the detail panel, we need to make sure that we do not have any of these options turned on. So denoise is not checked, super resolution is not checked, sharpening not only not turned on, but the value is set to 0. And then with the manual noise reduction, again, everything is set down to 0 there. And next thing I want to do is make sure under the lens corrections, I need to turn that off and make sure that profile corrections and chromatic aberration is not selected. That's what you got to make sure is going on. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a bad file because stuff is going to be done twice. Wow, look at that. That is just awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, I'm liking that quite a bit, actually. Quite a bit. So there we go. That's my Lightroom thing. So that's the complete picture on DeepPRIME XD3 for Fujifilm's X-Trans sensors. Why it started here first, why your ISO crossover point is earlier than a Bayer shooter's crossover point, the convincing Fujifilm file standard for judging when you've pushed things too far, and exactly how to fix the artifacts you might run into. If this helped you clear up when to actually use XD3 on your Fuji files, hit the like button. It helps this video reach more X-Trans shooters working through the exact same questions. Subscribe for more deep dives like this, and if you want the full written reference with every decision table and settings chart, I've got the complete companion guide DeepPRIME XD3, the complete guide for X-Trans sensors, linked in the description. Drop a comment with your Fujifilm body and the kind of subject that gives you the most trouble. Foliage, night street scenes, whatever it is. I read every comment and it helps me pick the next test case. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.